Hey guys, Fernando the Spartan Gomez with SpargoConnect, and I'm excited today because today I get to share with you an interview I did with an amazing man. Now this is a person whom I look up to personally. I've read all their books, and I use his research in both my personal and my professional life. That person is Dan Ariely. Dan Ariely is the professor of behavioral economics at Duke University. He's a New York Times bestseller 3 times over, and he has multiple TED Talks which have been viewed over 10 million times. And in today's interview, we go over his research and how businesses can best apply that. And we also go over some things such as the Starbucks secret, how Starbucks was able to enter a saturated coffee market, not compete on price, and completely dominate. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy the show. The first question I had was about relativity, right? So in one of your books, you mentioned The Economist, where they introduced this third, less attractive option to influence the purchase of the option that they want people to buy. And I see this work in an online model, or in the examples you gave where it's just 3 choices. But how would you apply this theory of relativity to a more complex situation in an offline business, say a restaurant where you want to sell a certain kind of dish? How would you position the menu, if you will?
So first of all, I think it's important to realize that the real thing we want to think about is relativity. And people use relative evaluations in almost everything in life. You go into a dark room, not perfectly dark, but not very light, and in the beginning it looks to you dark, and then a few seconds after you get used to it and you judge things relative to each other. We think about how much we drink. Think about something like Coke. Over the years, the sizes of Coke have increased dramatically. We don't have the 6 ounce and 8 ounce. Now we have 24 and 36 and 48 ounce. We have these huge bottles. Lots of things are relative. And because people use relativity in almost every aspect of our decision making, there's a question of where does it come to mind and relative to what. So just this week, somebody told me a story. He said that they have a store for high-end video and audio equipment. And they created this cable that they charge $50 for. And in the beginning, they thought, nobody would buy this cable. But people started loving this cable compared to the, cheap $10 cable. So then the guy said, let me do a cable for $100. And it became the most popular. And then he said $200 and $400. He said what happened was at the moment he did the $400 cable, nobody wanted the $50 anymore. Now, why is that? It's because we have a very hard time evaluating the true value of things. So what do we do instead? We use relative value. And we say to ourselves something like, relative to the $400 cable, the 50 has to be terrible. So he basically said that many people came, they saw that the cable is $400, they didn't buy anything, right? Because the 50 just looked like you don't want that. But they didn't buy the $400 one. So relativity is an important aspect, and it's important to realize that when you can't evaluate things objectively, which is most things in life, we evaluate them in relative terms. Now, you gave the example of a restaurant, and I think restaurant is particularly interesting because it's true that in a restaurant we have a menu, and it's as if all the prices in the menu are relative to each other, but the menu is actually one full menu with subsections. And it's true that there's a spillover between the subsections, but there's also independence, which means that we evaluate the price of desserts relative to desserts, and wine compared to wine, and beer compared to beer. Now, if you have an overall expensive menu, everything is expensive, you're going to adjust to that level to some degree, but you're mostly going to be influenced by the things in the local, more relevant level. So if you have, let's imagine that you have an expensive menu, but with relatively modest prices for dessert, right? Mm-hmm. People are probably going to be influenced a little bit by the overall price, and maybe said, hey, the dessert is moderately priced. but they would also influence by the relative prices of dessert. So maybe they would be buying something that they wouldn't have bought because something is $2 cheaper. Mm-hmm. Now, it would not maybe make a difference on the overall price of the meal because it's an expensive restaurant and everything is very expensive, but nevertheless, people would do a relative valuation. So what we need to understand is that A, relativity is important, and B, people only do relativity in a small subset. And we need to go and we need to understand what is this subset in people's minds. So think about a particular store. Let's say it's a clothing store. And you say, where's relativity going to come from? Well, some of it will come from the overall price of the store. But some of it, most of it, would come from the fact that people would compare trousers to trousers and socks to socks and underwear to underwear and shirts to shirts and sweaters to sweaters. Sale is basically relativity. Think about it. What do we say when we say something is on sale? We say relative to what the price was for these things in the past, it is now cheaper. Mm-hmm. Why would you care? Why would you care about what it used to cost? Mm-hmm. We care about because it gives us a relative signal. And if you say, well, you're comparing shirts to shirts, in this case, you compare this shirt to this shirt in the past. Yeah. Right, so it's a very strong relative signal.
And I think that's the key takeaway. Because initially I was thinking, for example, a clothing store, I was thinking overall, how would you price things relatively? And the key takeaway there, I think, for a lot of business owners and myself, is to identify those subsets, right? So in that, identify the pricing, the shirt that you want to sell, the shirts, identify the pants, identify the trousers of your business, and then price them relativity according to the item that you want to sell the most. So a lot of companies and businesses that are competing in a saturated market sometimes end up competing on just a price basis, right? The commodity basis. And I think Starbucks is a real powerful case study of how they didn't enter the market competing on coffee, right? They did the most they could to differentiate themselves from coffee. They didn't call it a coffee, they called it a macchiato, a frappuccino, and you mentioned it in your book.
I think what you meant to say is they didn't compete on price.
Yeah, they didn't compete on price.
That's right. You said they didn't compete on coffee, but yeah, that's right. They basically refused to compete on price, and they basically said, let's just start differentiating coffee.
Yeah, and they and they entered the market, and they didn't position themselves as we're fancy coffee. They position themselves as, we're an experience. You're coming here and you're getting a macchiato, you're getting a frappuccino, and we don't do small, large, and medium. You're getting venti, grande, etc. And I think personally, that's a genius way. Obviously, you see the success that Starbucks had, to enter a saturated market, which was the coffee business. So if a business or a startup wanted to do something similar, say enter the clothing business in such a manner that Starbucks did, what would they need beforehand? What would they need to identify, and how could they position themselves in order to not compete on price?
Yeah, so there's a lot to say about this, and also it's not easy, and it's not easy because Starbucks went into in the U.S. a relatively naive market, right? So we had things called coffee, and Starbucks came and said, you know what? We will create a language. Think about what happens in wine. In wine, we have things like tannin and complexity and acidity, and we rate wine on all of those things. And we swirl it like this, and we smell it, and we look at the leg and the bouquet of the wine, and all of a sudden we're willing to pay $40, $50, maybe more dollars per bottle of wine, right? So what Starbucks did is multiple things at the same time. And one of them was they created a language for consumption and ordering. So basically, it wasn't coffee anymore. It was something different. I mean, yes, it was coffee, but it wasn't the coffee we had. Now it was something different. So, in the clothing market, it will be difficult to penetrate something that people have been doing for a long time and say, you know what, everything you know up to now about clothing, forget about it. We're in a different category. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's just harder, right? It's easier to go into a market where the category has not moved much in a long time. Think about what Apple did to smartphones. Apple came to a market that had lots of phones, and all of a sudden they say, you know what? Phones are all about moving your finger across and pinching, and this is it. This is the magic. The magic is these two movements. And once you have this, everything is different, and you can't really price that compared to the other thing. It's not a phone anymore. It does all of those things. And I should mention one other thing about Starbucks before we go to the actual question, which is that lots of people complain about coffee. Oh, we spend too much on coffee and so on. I actually love coffee. I actually had 2 cappuccinos this morning. Coffee gives me a tremendous amount of pleasure. I think, yes, there are some people who spend too much money on coffee, but I think Starbucks also increased the pleasure that we get from coffee, right? And I think that's a perfectly wonderful thing to do. And if you basically say, let me try to educate people and get them to think differently about coffee, and buy a cup of coffee and feel that people have done something for themselves, that now you've kind of took 10 minutes of your day and said, this is my moment, and I now think differently about my day, that's not a bad deal for $3, right? I mean, it is shocking that they can charge that much, but at the same time, you have to say, in the big scheme of things, how much pleasure am I getting from this? And maybe it's okay. So that's just to say that when we create a new category, to the extent that we can create a different type and an elevated experience of pleasure, people would be willing to pay for it. And if we reframe it like this. But the idea is reframing it away from a functional product, right? So what's a functional product? A functional product saying, you know what, I'll just inject you with caffeine. Or I'll just take a glass of water and I'll add caffeine to it, and you'll just drink it because you want the functional part of this.
Yeah.
And Starbucks said this is not about that, right? It's about the ceremony, and it's about thinking about yourself and treating yourself for a moment, and you deserve it, and doing something that makes you feel special and fancy, and maybe European or whatever the atmosphere is. So now to your question. So what would companies who want to do something like this need to do? One is to think about language. Again, if you consume the best meal in the world sitting in front of your laptop, the value of it will be negligible. Mm-hmm. But if somebody told you where the tomatoes came from, and the lettuce, and the salt, and so on, and you got to think about it and reflect on it, all of a sudden it will be a different experience, right? So we often think about people as just consuming what they get, but the reality is that much of the consumption happens in the brain. And how do you get people to their brain to participate more in the consumption experience? What would it look like if we try to describe things in a way that would get things to be more exciting? And that's where kind of the placebo effect is, and expectations and so on. And the other thing is that we want to define the experience in a more concrete way. So as long as you're selling a commodity and you're saying this is just a commodity and here is how you get it, why would you pay any different amount? Mm-hmm. Imagine you had the business for selling nails. Yeah. How much more can you charge? Would be very hard. Mm-hmm. Now you could develop a language, and you could say, you know what, these nails, if you only use them, you could rest assured that your house is going to be secured by Fernando's nails, which have been kind of passed by magical formula generation from generation to generation. They are handmade by this. You could make something, but it would be more difficult. So how do we think about language, and how do we think about the consumption experience, and how much can we increase that? Yeah. But and let me tell you one thing about clothing that I'm very interested in. So, clothing, a big part of clothing is what is called signaling, right? We communicate something to other people by the kind of clothes we wear. You wear, I don't know, diesel jeans, you communicate that you're a teenager or a rapper or something like this. You're wearing a Gucci, you're communicating something else. But we were wondering at some point whether whatever we wear doesn't only communicate to other people, but it also communicates back to ourselves. This is what is called self-signaling. And self-signaling is the idea that we don't exactly understand who we are, but by the actions we take, we think differently about ourselves. So imagine you walk down the street and you see a beggar and you give them $5. All of a sudden you say to yourself, hey, look at me, I'm a really nice guy. Now, you haven't changed, you're the same guy that you were before, but you just took an action that proves to you that you're a nice guy. So self-signaling is the same thing. So we got people to wear shirts that had the word generous on them or the word stingy. And we got them to walk around campus, and then when they finished, they came back and said, hey, before you take these shirts off, there's some games here we want you to play. And people played some games, and we wanted to see whether stingy became stingy and generous became generous, and the answer is yes. But for some people, the printing on the shirt was on the inside of the shirt. Now, what do you think happened? The effect was even larger when it was in the inside of the shirt, right? And that's basically just self-signaling. So, again, if you think about language and how we think about our experiences, how do businesses help people control that? How businesses help people think about that? What is the role of telling people, printing something, getting people to think differently about their actions? There's a huge wealth of potential information out there, right? What if we open a clothing store and we started writing things on the inside of clothing? Would those things actually get people to think differently about themselves? Maybe we had a line of clothes dedicated to negotiating with your boss that had words about confidence and ability and strength written on the inside. I think that would be quite interesting.
No, and I think you touched on a lot of good points there. And the biggest thing is that if you want to enter the market like Starbucks did, you have to have a story. You have to have a background from where the product came from, how it was built, and you see that in some clothing lines, like we're U.S. made only, and we use recycled materials, etc.
Yeah, so you could do lots of things with positive associations, and that, by the way, provides an interesting question about reciprocity. So many companies are trying to do kind of corporate social responsibility, right? Which basically says, if you buy a bottle of water, we will donate 25 cents to a charity. But the interesting thing is that this is not real reciprocity, because you need to take the action first, and then we will give the money to charity. Compare that to a different way in which it said, I have already paid $25 to a charity for water on your behalf. Now it's your time to take the action and buy a bottle of water to justify this. It turns out that the second model is what reciprocity is all about. Reciprocity is not that you ask people to take the first action and then you will take something. It's that you do the first things for them first. You take the first step. So imagine that you run a small business and people come in, and the moment somebody comes in, you say, you know what, no matter what you do here today, I've already donated 25 cents to a water charity today on your behalf, right? Now this is reciprocity. I kind of have done something already, and I can even strengthen it. I can say, please write down your name, the charity will get the money as if it came from you. This is, now you feel some commitment to me. Whereas if I said, you know what, when you finish shopping here today, as long as you buy anything, I will donate 25 cents. Now it doesn't feel like reciprocity. It feels like you're charging me for something and you're taking some of the profits and giving it away. So we do need to understand, how do we create this notion of reciprocity? There is the question of how do you get a good feeling with the shirt, and do you want to connect it to giving or to something else? But reciprocity is also very, very interesting. And if we want to utilize it, which lots of companies do, we need to understand how it works.
No, and so if we can go back to that, and I think that's a really interesting approach, because yet you do see that movement a lot is, buy something and, we'll donate 10%, 5% of the profits. Have you seen that the reverse, which you just mentioned, in effect, and has it been effective?
Yeah, so there's a couple of beautiful papers by Noah Goldstein at UCLA. And in one of those, he was trying to get people to reuse their towel in the hotel. Right? So you go to the hotel and the hotel says, please reuse the towel. It will save the environment money. And of course, it will also save the environment. And of course, it will also save the hotel some money. Yeah. But in one version, they basically said, we have already donated $1 on your behalf to an environmental cause. Now it's your turn to pay back, and reuse your towel. And that was much more successful than saying, if you will reuse your towel, we will donate $1. Right? Yeah, so think about it. If you say, if you use a towel, we will donate $1, it's basically a discount model, right? But the discount model goes to somewhere else. And we did a study also once with a big software company. This was a software company that if you download the software and didn't do much with it, it was for free. And there was, of course, a paid version. But people were doing something. They were submitting some documents. They were doing something with the software. And when people finished, we did a name your own price approach. So we said, look, you don't have to pay for this software. You got it. You knew it was for free, that if you don't need to use it in a very complex way, it doesn't cost you anything. But we had lots of engineers and lots of people working on it. So if you feel like, why don't you pay us some money? And lots of people were happy to pay some money. In a different version of the experiment, we said, why don't you pay us some money, and half of the money you would give, we will give to charity. Right? What happened now? People gave half. Now, people gave half, and then half went to charity, which means that the company got a quarter of what they got in the other condition. You see, what happened was that people felt reciprocity toward the company. You created this software. I just used it. It's true I don't have to pay for it, but I used it. I got lots of benefit for it. I feel some reciprocity toward you as a company. If you say now we're giving the money to a charity for kids' games, I would say that's not my charity. That's not exactly what I want to give the money. I feel obligated to you. You're giving half the money somebody else. I'm just not that interesting. So we really need to understand where our feeling of fairness and reciprocity coming from, if we want to use that mechanism.
Yeah, and I think if we could just talk on this just a little more. Because you do have a lot of software developers out there that do give plenty of software out for free, and they spend their own time and their own resources to develop this for the community en masse. And then when it comes time to ask for donations to recoup some of the costs or the servers, they're often conflicted as the best way to approach that. And I think the takeaway here is, rather than associate that with the feel-good movement of hey, give us $10 and we'll donate $5 to charity, to rather frame it as, we created this software, and if you like it, help contribute towards its cost.
Yeah, and not just that. It's basically saying, look, we've done these things for you. We've spent this amount of hours developing this software, and our servers are not free, right? We're paying every month this amount to run the servers. So the feeling of fairness is often not about fixed cost, but about marginal cost. So, don't answer this question, but imagine how you would feel about downloading illegal music online. Most people don't feel bad about it. How would you feel about going to a restaurant and leaving the restaurant without paying? Most people would feel terrible. What's the difference? In the first case, everybody's doing it. But on top of that, you don't feel that you're costing anything to the artist, right? You would probably not steal $1 from an artist's pocket, an artist that you like. In the restaurant case, it's clear that there was marginal cost. somebody cooked our food, somebody served our food, somebody bought the food. I mean, all these things that created cost because of us. If we would now not pay for it, we would feel like thieves. So, if you're using my servers and every day that you use my software cost me some money, I want to tell you about this. It's not just about appreciating me. It's about, look, buddy, I'm spending money on your happiness every day by getting these servers. Now, you don't have to pay. We have this model, but just so you know, you're costing me some money. And now I'm doing this thing for you, and you could be a leech on society and do this without paying back, and just you use other people's generosity to subsidize your life. But if you think about it, it's time to at least repay your costs and maybe help us more generally. So I also think that online people have no idea how much things costs, right? People don't understand that servers cost money.
Yeah, and I had this question down, but I'll bring it up now. So you talk about the excitement of free, right? You know how we get irrationally excited when something's free, and then on the other hand, there's the power of price, right? Where we only value something if we pay a certain price. So with those two regards, when should we give something for free to cause that irrational excitement? And I have a follow-on question for that. But and when should we not give something away for free and have them pay for it so that they value it more and they get more an enjoyable experience out of it?
We did our experiments on free. We used products with very clear experience. Sorry. So when we did our experiments on free, we used products that people knew very well. We use Ferrero Rocher chocolate and Lindt truffles and Hershey Kisses. And what happens with those products, people have lots of experience with them. So if we offer something for free, they say, I know the quality and this is free. That's very exciting. If you offered something that people didn't know the value of it yet, it was a new product, right? Let's say it's an app that helps you to sleep better, right? And you basically offer it for free. Then people say, how much is this worth? What is the value of this? I don't know. It's free. Probably that's about what it's worth, right? So if you're dealing with something that people know very well, free is exciting. When you deal with something that people don't know very well, free is exciting, but it can also devalue it. And then, of course, there are other categories like free shipping. Shipping we know is expensive. Making it free is incredibly valuable. So I would ask you, when you think about free, is how much is this going to affect the perceived quality of the experience? And if it's going to affect negatively the perceived quality of the experience, maybe you should be worried about using free. And then another thing to realize is that once you have a market that has free, it's really hard to get out of this. Like, I think a lot about the ecosystem of the apps world. In the ecosystem of the apps world, most apps are free. So because of relativity, what happens? We think of any app that costs money as being inappropriate. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how many people I've asked that have no paid apps. They don't pay for apps ever, right? They just think it's wrong to pay for apps. And I think we've just created bad ecosystems. I think both Google and Apple should have never allowed free. They should have had a minimum price of 10 cents, right? Because moving from free to 99 cents or for $3 is a huge step. Moving from 10 cents is not such a huge step. So if I were them and I would think about the health of the ecosystem, I wouldn't have allowed zero. I would have allowed only some minimum price. And yes, there would be some apps that people would never download or download less. But I think the ecosystem as a whole would be more healthy.
Yeah, and I agree. If I can go back to the free thing, so the irrational excitement that free causes, right? So a lot of what you see in marketing, buy this and you get a free gift. We'll give you, a free consultation. We'll give you a free X, Y, and Z. when do you think it's the best time to capitalize on that excitement? So I'm giving something for free, right? As my foot in the door, right? So I'm currently experimenting in my own business. I'm giving something away for free as my foot in the door with a business. Now, when would be the best time for me to ask for money for like another business? Would it be before, after, during? And that's something I'm currently wondering right now for
Yeah.
myself.
So there's lots of complexities here, and it's hard to give a true answer that will be correct for many things. But let's think about bundled payments. Let's say you have two products that you want to sell together. And you could say, oh, I have product A and B. I can charge $5 for A, $5 for B. Or I can charge 0 for A, $10 for B. Or I can charge $10 for A, 0 for B. Which one is better? Well, the worst one is when you charge 5 and 5%, $5 and $5. Why? Because people pay for both. It's better to charge more for one and free for the other, right? Even if the overall amount is the same. And which of the two is it better to charge 0 for? The product that people would feel more guilty buying, right? So the product that seems more inappropriate to pay for. So imagine we're buying a pencil and chocolates, right? And let's say each of them costs $5 just for simplicity. Presumably the chocolate makes you feel a bit more uncomfortable spending on it, right? $5 for chocolate, maybe it's expensive, it's indulgent, and so on. So under those conditions, it would be better to pay $10 for the pencil and get the chocolate for free, right? It's more indulgent, you feel more guilty about spending it, so it would be better off. The other thing that you might want to think about zero is to think about how do you give people the risk of zero, but without the perception of price. So imagine, for example, that you invited me to do a workshop. And let's say I charge $20 and, you think $20 is expensive and you're not sure if you want the risk, right? One way for me to do it is to say, you know what, I'll give you the first workshop for free and then you could decide if you want it later, right? But that might create a case in which you devalue what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Another approach I could take is to say, look, I charge $20 for a workshop, but I'll tell you what, I'll do the first one, and if you decide it's not worth it, you can get your money back. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? That's an approach that basically says, oh, don't pay me or do something like this. That's an approach, money back guarantee, that basically doesn't devalue the price from the beginning, but instead it says, I'm reducing the risk for you to try, but it's not that I think it's not worth it. So there are some other models that you can think about that get people to have low risk of experiment with something, but doesn't necessarily change their price valuations. And by the way, the zero, also you have to understand that zero, when you do zero in a competitive market, it just spirals, right? So most people deal in some competitive market or another, and if you offer zero and you get lots of people, somebody else would offer zero, and soon enough, too many people would offer zero, and the competition will just be terrible, and nobody will be able to sustain the marketplace.
I know you're involved in a lot of things, startup economics, Irrationality Labs, and then you have your new book coming out, or already came out actually.
Yeah.
Is there anything you like to talk about? So, anything you want the people who are watching this to know?
No, not specifically. I have a website, danariely.com. I provide all kinds of information out there. If somebody's interested, join, participate. From time to time, I ask people to participate in experiments. So if you're interested in signing up and maybe participating from time to time in a study, we would appreciate it. That's it.
Awesome, Dan. Well, I thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. And I'm sure everybody who's going to watch this is going to appreciate that as well.
My pleasure.
All
Bye
right.
bye.